People ask me what I screamed when I found her on that kitchen floor. The truth is, I didn't scream at all. I got quiet. That quiet lasted 6 months, and when it finally broke, I didn't just learn what my son had done that afternoon. I learned why, and the why was so much worse than the what. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 61 years old. I've been married to my wife Corinne for 32 years, and until 11 days ago, I would have told anyone who asked that my family was steady. Not perfect. Nobody's family is perfect. But steady. The kind you build over decades of showing up, paying for things nobody thanks you for, and loving people even when they make it hard. I need to give you some background first, because if I don't, you'll think I'm just a cold old man who punished his son over one bad afternoon. This was never about one afternoon. It just took me 6 months to understand that. Corinne and I started with nothing but a rundown 12-room motel on the North Carolina coast, the kind of place the bank practically gave away because nobody else wanted it. I laid tile until my knees gave out. She sewed curtains on a second-hand machine that cost us $40. We named it the Harborview, and over 22 years we built it into the kind of inn that gets written up in travel magazines and booked 8 months out for summer. That inn wasn't just a business. It was every sacrifice we ever made, stacked brick by brick. And from the day our son Bryson was born, I told him it would be his one day. Bryson is 31 now. Good job in commercial insurance, a job he landed partly through a favor I called in. 2 years ago, he married Whitney Whitmore, a genuinely sweet woman. Her parents, Roland and Denise, are a different animal entirely. The first time I shook Roland's hand at the engagement dinner, something in my chest tightened like a fist closing. His handshake lingered a beat too long, the kind that makes you feel like you just lost a negotiation you didn't know had started. I smiled anyway. You do that when your son is in love. That was my first mistake. It wasn't my last. The signs I missed. There were red flags for months before that Tuesday. I just didn't want to see them. About 4 months earlier, at a birthday dinner, Roland asked me, casually, like small talk, what my long-term plan was for the Harborview. I told him what I'd always said. Bryson would take it over when I was ready to slow down. Roland nodded, swirled his wine, and said, "Eventually's a funny word. Some men wait too long and lose the chance to do it on their own terms." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. 2 months later, Corinne mentioned Bryson had started asking strange questions during visits. Whether the inn was in a trust, what would happen to it if something happened to me. I told her he was just being responsible. She wasn't convinced. "He's not asking like a curious son," she said. "He's asking like someone's coaching him." 3 weeks before the trip, Corinne came home from lunch with Whitney looking unsettled. Whitney had gone quiet when the topic of Bryson's future with the family business came up. The kind of quiet that comes from knowing something you're not allowed to say. 3 chances, 3 warnings. I let every one of them pass because I trusted my son completely, and because some part of me, the part that raised him, coached his little league team, sat up with him through 2 broken engagements, simply couldn't imagine he'd let anyone talk him into hurting his mother. I was wrong about that. Painfully wrong. The trip home. 11 days ago, I flew to Seattle for a 3-day hospitality conference. Routine business I do 4 or 5 times a year. Everyone knew the dates. What nobody knew was that my final meeting got canceled on day 2. I could have stayed. Instead, I booked the first flight home, didn't call ahead. 32 years married, and I still like surprising my wife. I landed at 2:40 p.m., grabbed my bag, drove myself home, already picturing her face when I walked in early. When I turned onto our street, I saw Roland's black Denali in my driveway, and beside it, a silver rental sedan I didn't recognize. Something pulled tight in my chest. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just a family lunch I'd forgotten about. I parked, walked up, and the house was loud in 2 directions at once. From the kitchen, easy, comfortable laughter, the kind that belongs to people with nowhere else to be. From the living room, silence. The wrong kind. I pushed the door open. Finding her. Corinne was on the floor, back against the couch, legs out in front of her, one hand pressed to her head, the other trembling in her lap. Her lips were pale at the edges. A thin line of blood traced her hairline, where she must have struck something on her way down. Her eyes found mine the second I stepped inside, and in 32 years of marriage, I have never seen her look at me the way she looked at me right then, like she'd been holding on by pure will. And the instant she saw my face, some part of her finally let go. I didn't panic. I'm not a man who panics. I dropped my bag, got down beside her, called 911. While the dispatcher walked me through her pulse, through keeping her upright, I could still hear them, laughing 11 feet away, like nothing in the world was wrong. The paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. 7 minutes that felt like 7 years. A young woman named Foster led the response. She checked Corinne's vitals, ran a rapid stroke assessment, and looked up at me before she even spoke, the way people do when they already know the news is bad. Mr. Reyes, her blood pressure is critically elevated. Some of what we're seeing is consistent with a possible TIA, a mini-stroke. This kind of spike doesn't come from nowhere. Something significant happened before we got here, and it happened recently. I looked toward the kitchen. The laughter had finally stopped. Something in me that had been hot and frantic went very still. Cold, actually. I held Corinne's hand until they lifted her onto the stretcher. She squeezed my fingers twice. Our thing, 32 years of it. I squeezed back. Then I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the kitchen. The confrontation. The three of them sat at my table like they'd just finished a pleasant Tuesday lunch. Bryson at the head, Roland to his left, Denise to his right. Plates still out. Wine glasses half full. A closed leather folder sat near Roland's elbow. In my house. While my wife had a medical crisis on my living room floor, I stood in the doorway and let the silence stretch. Bryson stood the moment he saw my face. You don't stand like that unless some part of you already knows you're guilty. Dad. I raised one finger. He stopped. I looked at Roland. Silver hair, tan skin, hands folded like he was chairing a meeting he owned. Get out of my house. My voice was calm. Calm scares people more than shouting ever could. Roland tried the reasonable man routine. Daniel, if we could all just take a breath. I didn't ask for a breath, Roland. I asked you to leave, and I'm only saying it once more. Denise touched his arm. They gathered their things and passed through the living room on the way out, where they saw Corinne on the stretcher, oxygen mask on, IV taped in. I watched the color drain from both their faces. Good. I needed that image burned behind their eyes. The door clicked shut. Just me and Bryson. I sat down slowly, folded my hands, and looked at my son. Sit, talk, and I want every piece of it, because I promise you, whatever you leave out, I will find on my own, and it will cost you more than the truth will. What he told me, and what he didn't. Bryson told me Roland and Denise had planned the visit for 6 weeks, deliberately timing it around my Seattle trip. That leather folder held real legal paperwork drafted by an attorney I'd never heard of, structuring a transfer of controlling interest in the Harborview into a jointly held LLC, one where Roland would sit as a managing partner in an advisory capacity until Bryson was ready to run it independently. In plain terms, Roland wanted a permanent seat inside my business, using my son's signature as the door. And your mother, I said quietly. Where does she fit into this? She came in about 40 minutes after they got here. Heard what Roland was pushing. She wasn't having it. Told him straight out the inn wasn't mine to sign away. He talked over her. It got loud. Then she just stopped. Said her head was pounding. Said she was dizzy, and went to sit in the living room. He paused. I was going to check on her. Roland started up again about the timeline, and I got pulled back in, and I got pulled back in, and I got pulled back in. He couldn't finish the sentence a fourth time. I let the silence sit. So let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice different now, quieter. Your mother stood up to a man trying to take a piece of everything she and I spent 22 years building. He talked over her until she felt sick. She told you she needed to sit down, and you went back to the table, 3 times. Dad, I didn't know it was that serious. She's had hypertension for 8 years. A paramedic who met her 90 seconds ago understood the danger faster than her own son did in 30 minutes. I stood. I don't know who you've been becoming, I said, but he is not the man I raised. What I didn't know yet, what wouldn't surface for another 5 months, was that Bryson wasn't just weak that afternoon. He had a reason to keep going back to that table, a reason he was nowhere close to telling me. The hospital. I sat in a plastic hallway chair for 4 hours while they ran scans on Corinne. When the doctor came out, she used the words, "severe hypertensive episode with signs of a possible transient ischemic attack," and told me that another 20 or 30 minutes alone could have meant permanent damage. I sat beside her bed that night, holding her hand under fluorescent light, thinking about 32 years, the woman who sewed curtains for a motel nobody believed in, who raised our son with more patience than I ever had. And I thought about her on that floor, and the sound of laughter 11 feet away, and something in my chest went cold in a way it never had before. Not angry cold, decided cold. The first night, Corinne came home 2 days later with new medication and a warning from her cardiologist that her body could not survive another episode like that one. That warning sat in my chest like a stone. That night, once she was asleep, I went to my study. I didn't go in blind. I'd been rehearsing this in my head at the hospital for 2 straight days. I called the bank's after-hours line first. A woman named Patricia answered, professional and unbothered by the hour. "I need my son removed as an authorized user, effective immediately," I told her. "Of course, Mr. Reyes. Can I ask the reason just for our internal notes?" "Trust," I said. "That's the whole reason." She didn't push further. 4 minutes later, it was done. I called my insurance agent's emergency line next and left a message removing Bryson as a secondary driver. Then I sat with my hand hovering over the phone for a long moment, before dialing Gary Whitfield, the property manager who'd handled the lease I'd co-signed for Bryson and Whitney 2 years back. He picked up groggy. "Daniel, it's 7 a.m. Is everything okay? I need my name off Bryson's lease, Gary, as soon as legally possible." A pause. "Everything all right?" "It's being handled," I said. "Thank you for asking." I hung up and sat there in the gray morning light, feeling the weight of what I'd just started settle into my chest. There was no undoing any of it now, and some small tired part of me didn't want to. The money. The transfer was the hardest one. For 6 years, on the first of every month, I'd quietly moved money into Bryson's account. It started as help getting on his feet after college. It became a habit neither of us discussed. I logged into the account at 3:15 a.m. and stared at the recurring transfer for a long time before I clicked cancel. Not paused. Canceled. I sat back in my chair, and for the first time that whole night, my hands were shaking. That transfer wasn't just money. It was a cushion I'd built under my son without ever admitting it to myself. A safety net that maybe, possibly, let him make the kind of choices a man makes when he knows somebody will always catch him. I thought about calling Corinne in to talk it through, then didn't. She needed to sleep. This was mine to carry. The phone call with Roland. 3 weeks later, once Corinne was medically cleared and the worst of the fear had settled into something more like resolve, I called Roland directly. My attorney had spent those 3 weeks building an ironclad ownership structure for the Harborview, one that made any future paperwork, from anyone, legally meaningless, without my notarized signature. Roland answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that same easy confidence. "Daniel, good to hear from you." "I know what you tried to do," I said, no preamble. "I've had legal counsel go through everything in that folder you left with my son. What you attempted has a name, Roland. Attempted fraud through undue influence. My attorney assures me it has real teeth, especially given the documentation trail you were kind enough to leave." Silence on the line. The first silence I'd ever heard from Roland Whitmore. "If you ever again try to involve yourself in my business through my son," I continued, "I won't be calling to give you a warning next time. Daniel, I think you're misunderstanding what we were trying to—" "Goodbye, Roland." I hung up before he could finish. He never brought it up again, but I knew this wasn't over. Men like Roland don't disappear. They just go quiet and wait for the next opening. 5 months of silence. For 5 months, Bryson tried. I'll give him that. He called every week, sometimes just to check on his mother, sometimes clearly hoping I'd soften. I kept things civil but distant. Corinne, against my better judgment, Let him visit her for coffee twice. She said a mother's love doesn't come with a 6-month waiting period, and I didn't have the heart to argue with a woman who'd nearly died on our living room floor. But something about those visits nagged at me. Corinne mentioned, almost in passing, that Bryson seemed distracted during their coffee, checking his phone constantly, flinching at unknown numbers. I filed it away. I'd learned the hard way not to ignore small details anymore. The twist I didn't see coming. It was Whitney who finally called me, 5 months after that Tuesday, her voice tight in a way I'd never heard from her before. "Mr. Reyes, I need to tell you something, and Bryson doesn't know I'm calling." I sat down. "I'm listening." "My father didn't come up with the LLC idea on his own," she said. "Bryson went to him first." I felt something cold settle in my stomach, a different cold than the one from that Tuesday. "Bryson's been in trouble for almost 2 years," she continued. "There was an investment, a friend's startup, something in commercial real estate. He put in more than we had, a lot more. He's been quietly bleeding money trying to cover it, credit lines. A second loan against our condo he never told me about until 3 weeks ago. He was drowning, Mr. Reyes, and he was too ashamed to come to you. So he went to your father instead," I said quietly. "He asked my dad for advice on getting access to money without telling you directly what it was for. My dad saw an opportunity in that. He turned Bryson's desperation into his own plan, but it started with Bryson asking, not my father offering." I sat there for a long moment, the phone against my ear, feeling the entire 6 months rearrange itself in my mind. Bryson hadn't just been weak-willed that afternoon, manipulated by a scheming father-in-law. He'd been drowning in a debt he was too proud to admit, and instead of coming to the man who'd built an entire business from nothing, who would have found a way to help him, he'd gone looking for a way to take what he needed without ever having to say the words, "I failed, and I need you." Every time he went back to that table wasn't just weakness under Roland's pressure. It was his own money on the line, his own secret unraveling in front of him. That's why he couldn't tear himself away, even with his mother collapsing in the next room. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because he's about to lose the condo," Whitney said, her voice breaking. "And because I'm done watching him choose shame over honesty, he needs to hear the truth land somewhere real. I thought it should come from someone who won't just bail him out to make the fear stop." The porch. Bryson showed up 2 days later, having found out from Whitney that she'd told me everything. I watched him from the front window, shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen on him, not even as a teenager caught in his worst lies. He didn't try the door. He sat down on the porch steps and waited. I stepped outside and sat down beside him, the way I used to when he was 7 and scared of something he couldn't name. "You could have told me," I said. "I know. 2 years, Bryson. 2 years of watching you drown and saying nothing." I was ashamed. His voice cracked on the word. "You built something out of nothing, Dad. I lost money on a friend's idea I didn't even fully understand, and I couldn't stand the thought of you looking at me the way you're looking at me right now." "I'm not looking at you with shame," I said. "I'm looking at you wondering why you thought I'd rather lose you than lose money." He put his face in his hands. For a long time, neither of us said anything. "Your mother almost died on that floor," I finally said, "while you tried to solve a problem you created, using a stranger's daughter's family instead of the people who've loved you since before you could walk." "I know." His voice was barely audible. "I think about it every single day." "Good," I said. "Because that's not something you get to stop thinking about. Not for a long time." I told him then, for the first time in 5 months, that I would help him, not by writing a check, not by quietly fixing it the way I'd fixed every problem he'd ever had since he was a boy. I told him I'd help him find a financial counselor, help him structure a real repayment plan, help him tell Whitney every remaining detail he was still hiding. But the money, the doors, the cushion I'd spent 30 years building under him, that stayed closed until he'd rebuilt it himself, brick by brick, the way his mother and I built the harbor view. "That's fair," he said quietly. "That's more than fair. Where things stand now, it's been 6 months since that Tuesday. Bryson sold his share of the failed investment for pennies on the dollar and started paying down the rest with a plan a financial counselor helped him build No help from me beyond making the introduction. He and Whitney downsized to a smaller apartment. Roland hasn't spoken to me since that phone call, and from what Whitney tells me, hasn't spoken much to Bryson either, which tells me everything I need to know about what kind of relationship that really was. Corinne's blood pressure is stable. She sat across from me at dinner last night and laughed at something small, the real kind of laugh, and I got to watch it happen because I was finally, fully in the room. Some people will say I was too hard on my son. Maybe I was. But I watched a stranger treat my wife's medical crisis with more urgency than the man I raised did, and it took me 6 months to understand he wasn't choosing his in-laws over his mother that afternoon. He was choosing his own shame over the truth, and it nearly cost us both everything. The greatest thing I ever gave Bryson wasn't the safety net I built under him for 30 years. It was finally letting him fall far enough to learn how to stand back up on his own. He's rebuilding now, slowly, honestly, without me catching him. Whether he becomes the man I always believed he could be is entirely up to him. But my wife is alive, she is home, and for the first time in a long time, so is the truth.